Hey, Melody, thank you very much for joining us.
Hey, Dr. Sensei, how are you? Aloha and love from Orlando, Florida, USA.
Oh, great, great. All the way from USA, from Florida. Melody, you are an international best-selling author. You are a keynote speaker. You are a thought leader. You are a transformational coach. You are into media. Now, this does not happen so fast. You have to go through a lot of struggle before you get into that particular zone, what I call it. You've gone through the struggles, ups and downs. And where does your story start from?
Yeah, so 1986
Mm-hmm.
was a pivotal year. I was
Okay.
living in the Philippines. That's where I was born and raised. Up
Okay.
until 1986, I was a child.
Okay.
And I come from a prominent family, probably similar to India. My father was a doctor and chief of staff of two hospitals,
Mm-hmm.
very well known in his field of work. My mother was also an executive, basically senior leader for Hyatt International Hotels,
Okay.
and also basically an entrepreneur. So
Mm-hmm.
they were very well known in their successes. We lived a comfortable life, but at the same time, they were humanitarians and philanthropists. So that's something that never took away from them. In their kindness of gesture and heart, we took on this distant relative to help him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, family's family. We took him a distant relative to help him because he came from impoverished conditions and
Okay.
wanted to make a living in the city we lived in,
Mm-hmm.
right, to provide for his own family.
Yeah.
So we took him in, and unfortunately, what had taken place from that is in doing his odds and ends job, meaning he took different jobs so he can make a living,
Mm-hmm.
he discovered something that was in corruption
Mm-hmm.
that he basically said the people had to know something about.
Mm-hmm.
So, unknown to my parents, he made an arrangement to speak with a radio show
Okay.
to discuss what he had discovered and share it with the public.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that never happened because he was kidnapped in front of my mom's store.
Mm-hmm.
And they told my mom there was 5 men holding this little guy, my uncle,
Mm-hmm.
with a gun, and identified themselves to be cops.
Okay.
And they actually were not. And what had taken place since then was he was violently and brutally murdered
Mm-hmm.
before he could meet with media to
Mm-hmm.
speak about what he said was the truth that people had to know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just when, and my mother was the one that was called in to identify his body, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just when you think that things couldn't get worse, we had no idea that there was a surveillance on our family.
Mm-hmm.
We had no idea that there were people watching us because of the fact that he lived with us.
Mm-hmm.
And what had happened after that, violent murder, then became death threats now coming to my family.
Mm-hmm.
So what parents would not do anything to save their children,
Mm-hmm.
because what those men did was they even tried psychological tactic of fear,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Imposing it on my mother by visiting her place of business and then putting pictures of my sister and I
Mm-hmm.
down to show that they've been watching us.
Mm-hmm.
So all I remember, Dr. Sensei, was literally having to be, pulled from school,
Mm-hmm.
be on the lockdown with security guards and everything, just basically, just making sure that nobody gets into our residence.
Mm-hmm.
And in the middle of the night,
Mm-hmm.
we were woken up by maids
Mm-hmm.
and told to be quiet as they were packing things frantically
Mm-hmm.
and leaving our house. It was me, my mom, my dad, and my sister,
Mm-hmm.
literally leaving our house with a white van waiting for us outside in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to disappear. My father, unfortunately, had to be left behind to take care of family affairs.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, we went from a comfortable lifestyle,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Attended the best private schools, like I said, a life of just comfort, to literally now being transferred or having to disappear from one country
Mm-hmm.
to now change our life coming to the United States. And we literally, even though we have visited the United States as tourists in the past,
Mm-hmm.
this was literally having a change of leaving everything behind,
Mm-hmm.
other than the clothes that was packed,
Mm-hmm.
and going into the dead of winter to grow up in Virginia Beach and going from a life of comfort to a life of lack and struggle. So I went from having a beautiful, huge bedroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful views, to now having to sleep on the floor with my sister while my mom had the bed, from her executive leadership position and entrepreneur, right?
Mm-hmm.
And very well respected woman in the city we grew up in, to now having to take a minimum wage job
Mm-hmm.
at a 7-Eleven,
Mm-hmm.
sweeping gas stations in the middle of the night,
Mm-hmm.
because now we had to forget everything we knew and start, life in America with absolutely basically nothing.
Wow.
So that was a hard transition. It was, I remember my mother's words of just saying, forget everything that was bad, but remember the good.
Mm-hmm.
But this is something that, this is now something that we have to be grateful that we're staying with relatives,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it was a hard adjustment for all of us,
Mm-hmm.
because you go from this beautiful home to a 1-bedroom
Mm-hmm.
that we're staying in, and my sister and I having sleep on floors, we became recipients of charity from churches handing us winter coats because we didn't have any,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then being subjected to other situations that made me feel not good enough about myself.
Mm-hmm.
Of just being, it's a feeling, it's the situations that we lived in and the conditions we lived in. And then so I grew up as a typical Asian child, making sure that I had straight A's, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
the expectations,
that's exactly
right?
that's exactly what every Asian mother and family do. They
Yes,
have to get
it's
straight A's. Yeah.
straight A's. It's like A minus is what is that, and what is a B, right?
Mm-hmm.
So A, and then you kind of have this preset course about your life.
Yeah.
That you're going to graduate from college, you're either going to be a doctor or lawyer, the cultural expectations.
Yeah.
Right. But
Yeah.
again, because life has thrown us such a wrench, I started looking at things very differently at a young age.
Mm-hmm.
So I go through life, I grow up, I take on a corporate job, I get promoted, right?
Mm-hmm.
A typical, very, very directional, right?
Mm-hmm.
One dimension thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But all that comes into a change
Mm-hmm.
in November of 2013, because then I get married. I'm in a relationship that was not healthy, toxic, right? At that time I was married and then finally divorced a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time in 2013, the Philippines, and I don't know if you remember this news, November 2013,
Mm-hmm.
the Philippines then gets hit with one of the biggest typhoons that ever made landfall, Typhoon Haiyan.
Yeah.
So this was measured the size of basically the width of coming from the Florida, USA to Canada in width, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it made landfall at over 185 miles per hour. So it's a typhoon signal 5, I believe is what they call in Asia, or over that.
Yeah.
All I remember was watching, from the United States, watching this entire devastation.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, no matter how far I've been away from home,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Home was still home.
Yeah, exactly.
There was still a calling for home. But yet I hear this prompting,
Mm-hmm.
right? I hear this prompting that says, stay away from regular television news
Mm-hmm.
and go into the internet and watch the Philippine news from that, because at that time, nothing was censored, so you saw everything.
Mm-hmm.
And in watching the internet news, I came across a story of this woman,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it looked like a nuclear bomb went off around her because everything was in pieces. Everything, there was nothing that was familiar with her anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But what really broke my soul was when I saw her, and she was holding 2 of her dead children that died from the storm, that was less than 5 years old, and then telling her story in complete shock that for 3 days she couldn't even bury her own kids, and that she had to lay down with them until help can arrive. And as a parent, as a mom, something about just her brokenness hit me so hard that I started crying uncontrollably, right? And just completely feeling so helpless on this side of the world, that I literally got down on my knees and just completely sobbing and just uttered a prayer. It was a very simple prayer that actually activated the mustard seed that moved mountains, right? So the prayer went, help me help them, and activate all the gifts you've given me to help me reach them.
Wow.
And that was all I remember from that night, because I went to bed crying my heart out at just the pain that I felt coming from her and the devastation I was seeing across the country of thousands of people dying, right? And just this desperate need. So Something
Is that how you came up with one night, one voice?
one night, one voice. So what had taken place from that, so the miracles that had happened, or the unfolding of that mystery that led me to currently where I'm at now, was in 24 hours, I literally had an idea that was just, it was just one of those ideas that came to my head of saying, oh my goodness, I sing. So why don't I put a small little concert and invite this number 20 was stuck in my head all the time, right? So I said, let me put a little concert together, and maybe I can invite 20 people that can donate more than I can. So I took to social media. I invited singers in the Filipino American community to sing with me. Well, it was very interesting that within 24 hours, I had a full lineup of performers. And I told them no one was getting paid, that this was strictly voluntary. They said, no problem. And what was strange about that is the first set of people that said, we'll do it with you, none of them were Filipino Americans. So in fact, I went, where did this go? Where did I send this? But I didn't pay attention too much to that. The second day, I lined up with a nonprofit who said, yes, they're going to work with me to issue receipts. By the third day, now I needed a venue, right, that can hold, again, 20 people. So I went to put, again, on social media, well, 3 friends of mine who don't know each other, who's never spoken to each other, gave me one pastor's name. So I said, okay, that's kind of interesting that 3 people gave me one person's name and they don't even know each other. So I called him, explained what I was trying to do. He actually first said to me, Melody, my church is very small. It holds 200 people. And I said to him, Pastor, I'm not looking for something for 200. I just need a space for 20 because this number 20 was just stuck inside in my head. And he said, okay, let me see what I can do. Now, from day 4 of that prayer, and the reason why I went back to the timeline is because then by day 4 of that prayer, you have to understand that in the United States in November, December, we're facing Christmas, Thanksgiving holiday. There's no venue available, or the venues we found wanted to charge us $10,000, $5,000. And I was thinking, if I had that, why in the world would I need to put a benefit thing together? I'll just send it to them.
Exactly.
So what had happened was then this pastor says, I have great news for you. I found you a venue. And I said, perfect. Does it hold 20 people? And he started laughing. He said, it holds more than that. And the venue is not going to charge you 1 penny. They're not going to charge you anything. All they want is that you acknowledge them as a sponsor. So I said, perfect. I said, where is this venue? Well, then he tells me, you have the concert auditorium being given to you by this very high, very prestigious private school. Right? And he says, and it holds 650 seats.
Wow. Something beyond your expectation.
And this is 4 days from unleashing that prayer. What ensued over the next 3 weeks was a complete miracle, because sponsors were coming to me without me having to search for them. I had the one night, one voice was born because when a graphic artist and I connected, right? And he said, what are you calling your event? And I said, and it just came to me, I said, we're calling this One Night, One Voice. And we both went quiet because he said, that's pretty powerful. How did you come up with that? And I said, because we literally have only one night to make voices heard. Right? I said, nobody's getting paid for this. 100% is going straight to the ground. And then the miracles that had taken place is because I haven't even spent a penny on anything. Right? The venue's free, the singers are free, the nonprofit said okay, the graphic artist is free. And then next thing you know, what started happening is a ripple effect, a domino effect. Because the power of connectivity, social media, from complete strangers, people just started coming up and says, how can we add value? How can we help? Right? And in fact, one of the biggest miracles that had taken place was a few days before this event, right? And again, at this point, remember, you also have to be careful what you pray for. Because when I asked God and I said, activate all the gifts, I mean, I literally did not sleep for 3 weeks because I was talking to people, marketing to people, PRing to people, right? Everything, putting a program together. I become a one woman show of putting an event by myself to this big scale. A few of the miracles that had happened right before this took place, because at this point I had awareness that something bigger than me was happening, that was making things possible. right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the rapid succession of just people or of companies just coming up saying, we're going to do this. And I'm like, I didn't even know how you found me, right? I don't know how you found me. But one of those companies is Pepsi Cola.
Wow.
So when they called me 4 nights before the event, it was literally a representative saying, we've been hearing about this one night, one voice. He goes, is it too late to sponsor you? And I my jaw was like yours. It's like, what? Right? And I said, sponsor me by, I said, are you giving us sodas to drink at the concert? Right? Because I had no idea. And they said, we only have a little bit of amount in our community relations. But something's moving me to help your cause. All I need is a letter from a nonprofit. Now, isn't it amazing that 3 weeks before that, a nonprofit lines up, right? Because if you can get a nonprofit to write that 100% is being donated, then we can approve it and send you funding for this.
Wow.
Well, the nonprofit jumped up. They're like, yeah, we'll do that letter, right? So Pepsi steps in. In fact, another company called Global Acts World Relief, which is one of the first responders to get into ground zero when there's natural disasters. The president finds me, happens to fly into Orlando the day before the concert, and says to me, Melody, I need to speak at your event because I have raw footage.
Wow.
Okay. So all this miracle started happening, ignited by the fact, when you talk about ignition, ignited by the fact that I started getting messages from people I didn't even know halfway from around the world saying, help us, we're starving. Because even though the news says we're getting food, the reality is the corruption. We're getting 1 can of sardines, 2 pans of rice every 4 days to feed a family of 6 to 8. Help us. Or help me, I can't find my father. You know, you seem to be popular. My last known, his now last known location is this, and I can't find him. So as much as I was being driven, propelled forward to take action, my heart also, I couldn't stop crying for those 3 weeks because of this letters coming my way that just fueled that fire to keep going, right? The day of the concert happens, Dr. Sensei, right? The day of the concert happens, and I have no idea how many people are showing up because there's been no advertising of this. It's all word of mouth, right? And all I remember, there was no rehearsals for the concert. I said to the singers, if you're that good, here's your program lineup. You only have time for mic check. There's no time to run a program. Here, we're live. Because who pulls a benefit concert in 3 weeks to that magnitude?
Yeah.
Right. And so I just said, all I remember was saying another prayer of saying 3 weeks ago, I activated a mustard seed, and he said to have faith for you to move mountains. I said, there's been so many miracles in this 3 weeks that I can't even wrap my head around. But all I know, I said, is tonight counts. All I know is that whether it's 10 people that are out there or 20, that I kept thinking there should be 20 people out there. I said, or whether the auditorium is filled to capacity. I said, it doesn't matter. Just let it be the people with the right hearts, because there's other people's lives waiting for this to happen. I think the reason why I started with that pain, that tragedy, that instant, like literally transition, is because in this journey, I'll never forget this moment when a CNN Hero of the Year award recipient, which is one of the biggest humanitarian awards in the planet that's known. The winner was from the Philippines. His name is Efren Peña Florida. Sends me a message on Messenger. I wrote out to his company saying, can I borrow a quote that I want to read for my event?
Wow.
Never expecting he would hear back. And I explained the why. I said, I'm putting this benefit for the Philippines, and I don't know what's going to happen, but I just want to borrow your quote, right? And he actually wrote back to me, and I'll never forget this, Dr. Sensei, because I'm sitting in a restaurant. This is a few days before the concert, just having lunch with my friends, strategizing over what we're supposed to do. And I get this message pop up. And I remember reading it and reading it again. And then in front of everybody in that restaurant, I started crying. And I mean, like ugly crying. I couldn't even breathe. So they look at me. They're like, Melody, what's wrong? What's wrong? And they grab my phone. My friends who knew my story of having to, going through that suffering, read that same message. And next thing you know, you have a table full of women just crying. And the waiters had no idea what to do with us. Right? Because they're like, what is wrong with you?
Uh-huh.
But see, the message that moved me to tears said, from that, CNN Hero of the Year, literally said, "Oh, hero of your country, rise up.
Mm-hmm.
Your people need you."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it broke my heart for about 1 minute, because I remember an anger coming, right? Coming so strong, of saying, how could you call me a hero of the country that betrayed me and my family,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that murdered a member of the family, and we had to go through suffering and losses, and now how dare you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Put this pressure on me that I have to rise up to this calling, because there are people waiting for me on the other side of the world. And then at the same token, as that anger comes, right, that I didn't even know existed since childhood, because I've kept it in,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we're conditioned to not share our emotions. We're conditioned deal with the trauma, internalize it, right?
Absolutely.
And go past it. That I didn't know that seeing that one sentence saying, "Oh, hero of your country, rise up, your people need you," basically became a trigger of memories flooding, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then past that anger, I just hear this calming voice of just saying, rise up.
Mm-hmm.
And then it became a homecoming, even without going home, of a completely different circle,
Yep.
right? Completely different circle. So anyway, when I stepped on that stage, Dr. Sensei, all I'm going to say is it was pitch black. And I told the engineers, I said, lights on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the auditorium was nearly filled to capacity.
You're
With
talking
no
about
advertising.
650, 600.
Almost 650, almost
Mm-hmm.
650,
Mm-hmm.
with zero advertising, zero expenses,
Mm-hmm.
zero, just word of mouth, and just people stepping up to respond, right? And it said miracles upon miracles. That number 20, right? Because there was more miracles to that, but basically my younger son, who was 7 years old then, is the one that literally opens a connectivity halfway around the world. Because how precious was it that after, the concert and the money, there was money being donated in, after the concert, my son, who was 7 at that time, tells me, "Mommy, how do you spell the Philippines?" And I said, so I gave him the spelling. I said, why? I didn't know that at the time he put his one and only dollar in an envelope. And he said, because he was there at the concert and saw everything. And he said, this is for the children of the Philippines. So as a social media mom, I post the envelope, right? And all I said is, who would have thought that the most unselfish heart comes from that of my own child, to try to help a country he's never been, nor have I been to since I was a child. But it was all he had, his $1. I said, and he gave his all, right? And he was 7 at the time. That connects me to the mobile soup kitchen for kids in the Philippines. That ends up, and like I said, this now becomes a whole new miracle set, right? Because what had happened, that number 20 that was implanted in my heart from the day one of the prayer saying, help me, help them, right? And the 20 came out, ended up being over 20,000 lives benefited and was saved, from sustainability gardens being built, from massive food feeding programs for children and families, to medical help. And I mean, when I looked at the testimonials that came back, when the mobile soup kitchen for kids, that was just a bunch of people cooking on the streets, right? When I directed all energy and effort to help them, and they started, I mean, they went to different school system, villages that were destroyed. I mean, you just name it. I had all this pictures being sent my way. And when I started seeing this signs that says, thank you, Miss Melody. Thank you, Melody Garcia. Thank you, One Night, One Voice. And the very final letter that came was said, the total tally of the people that had benefited from your efforts, plus other organizations you pulled into later on, right? But the total people just from that, from Mobile Soup Kitchen alone, they said was a total of over 20,000. I cried even more. Because
Wow, that was this is one of the longest interview I have ever done. Let me tell you, You broke all the rules. You
I
broke
wrote
all
all
the
the
rules, and you went. I think it took more than the time of 3 interviews, but still, I'm going to keep it. I'm going to break it down to 3 different parts so that people can
There
catch
you
up
go.
about who you are and how did you
Hmm.
come up with an early age, thrown all the way from your home and your home country, coming to your new country, from that luxurious lifestyle that you had. You were completely ditched where your mom
Hmm.
had to work like in 7-Eleven, and where you are today, changing lives of people and children around the world, being a very popular speaker, sharing stages with Michelle Obama, with Les Brown and people like those. You are a change agent, aren't you?
Thank you. Yes, I am, and I'm embracing, part of that identity. And when I say part, because there's so many moving parts, as you can tell, with what's unfolding, is just go realizing that, everybody is ignited for their purpose. The question is, are you really stepping up into that? Are you really
Absolutely.
stepping up into that game and play big? Don't hold back.
Exactly
Because
correct.
when you hold back, you minimize your impact, and when you hold back, there's just truth in lives that needs to be changed, right? In that story, because I still look back, just like with you, and I'm going, my goodness, this is unfolding at a rapid, very rapid pace, which means because it's happening in such a fast-paced element in my life, and doors are opening in so many different directions. That's because I also realize that there's such an urgent need,
Hmm.
because there is suffering that's going on, because not just children, but all genders, all races, all ages, right? Because there's suffering going on, there's confusion going on,
Hmm.
there's people crying out for help that are masked like chameleons,
Hmm.
showing the perfection. But because of the fact that I think you and I and others that had gone through some painful times are able to see through those masks pretty fast,
Absolutely.
because we've been there.
Exactly correct. Exactly
Mhm.
correct. Ladies and gentlemen, Melody.